Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya-madhyamam Asmadacharya-paryantam Vande Guru-paramparam. Good. Be seated, please. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the students attending this class online. We continue here at the end of the current chapter. This chapter is also the last chapter of the Uddhava Gita. And here at the end, we've come to the last topic of the last chapter of the Uddhava Gita. It's not the end of the text, because it'll go on several verses after the last topic is done. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, the Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. With that verse, Sri Krishna concludes his teaching, but then he goes on. Yeah. But he goes on to say some very important things. And we'll find something similar here. In the Uddhava Gita, that Sri Krishna finishes his teachings with this topic. Let me turn this up just a little bit. He finishes his teachings with this topic, but he doesn't finish the text. His conversation with Uddhava goes on. Interesting to compare the two before we see these verses. In the Bhagavad Gita, he ends by saying, Sarva Dharman Parityajya. In that context, dharma means the same as what it means here. In our current context, the word dharma is being used in the sense of spiritual practice. Remember, words have different meanings in different contexts. So in the last several classes, we've seen Sri Krishna using the word dharma here in the sense of spiritual practice. And he does so in the same way in the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman, give up all other dharmas. You're going to take dharma in the sense of righteousness? Certainly not. So dharma in that context also means spiritual practice. Sarva dharman parityajya. He's not telling you not to perform any other spiritual practice, but rather pointing to the most important spiritual practice. Mameva sharanam vraja. Seek me alone. So this is, he's not, when he's saying cast aside all other spiritual practices, such an expression is not meant to be taken literally. You have to understand, Sri Krishna is pointing to the most important spiritual practice, seeking him. And, not surprisingly, the Uddhava Gita ends with almost the same message, a little different, but almost the same. So we will see that today. I think we're ready. Good, thank you. Ayam hi sarva kalpanam, ayam hi sarva kalpanam, sadrichi no mato mama, sadrichi no mato mama, madbhava sarva bhuteshu, madbhava sarva bhuteshu, manovakaya vrittibihi, manovakaya sarva kalpanam, among all other things, and in this context, among all other spiritual practices. So, sarva kalpanam, among all other spiritual practices, ayam hi, this one indeed is sadrichinaha, mataha mama. In my opinion, mataha mama, this spiritual practice, which he'll describe in the second half, he says, is sadrichinaha. Sadrichi is an interesting word. It actually comes from the same root as dharma. Dr, to hold. In a dictionary, the first meaning for sadrichan will be wife, but wife in the sense of companion. The one who is your companion. And it's used here, not in the sense of wife, in the sense of companion. And it's a companion, the word companion derived from the word dharma. How wonderful. By the way, a common definition in Sanskrit of patni, wife, is saha dharmani. The one with whom you perform dharma is wife. The one with whom you live a life of dharma is patni. This is a common Sanskrit definition of wife. It's a different sense here because we're not talking about wife, we're talking about companion. Sadrichi is the one as wife, the one with whom you live a life of dharma. But here it's talking about living with dharma, having dharma as your lifelong companion. And that's what it means here. To have dharma as your lifelong companion. But dharma in what sense? Our current sense is not righteousness, as we just discussed. Dharma here means spiritual practice. So he's saying this, he says, sarv. Now you can, by the way, I think this really illustrates why merely reading a translation won't necessarily give you the right meaning. Because translators mistranslate a lot. So, if a translator translates this dharma as righteousness, you're going to get a completely ridiculous meaning for this. Or sarva dharman parityajya. What will translators do with that? They make a mess of it. And the point is that profound spiritual texts like the Uddhava Gita, Bhagavad Gita, if you merely read a translation, you're not going to really get the message. You need the help of a teacher. Otherwise, no translator can do what a live teacher can do. Of course, it means also the teacher should be someone who understands the text properly. Anyway, so dharma can be confused, sadrichinaha can be confused here. So in this context, sarva kalpanam, among all spiritual practices, ayam hi sadrichinaha. This is the best practice to have as your lifelong companion. Mataha mama. This is my opinion. This is in my opinion, the best teaching, the best practice to have as your lifelong compassion is what? Now in the third line, madbhavaha sarva bhuteshu. To have madbhava, mad is the pronoun me. Madbhava means my presence, my existence. Sri Krishna says, sarva bhuteshu, in all beings, to have that awareness of Sri Krishna's presence in all living beings And to do so, manas vak kaya vritti bihi, to do this vritti bihi with the actions of your manas, mind, vak, body, vak, speech, and kaya, body. So in all of your activities, to act in the world in day-to-day activities with this attitude is not the right word here, with this realization that Sri Krishna abides in all. Sounds a little like karma yoga, sounds a lot like karma yoga, but there's something that we've missed here. So he's talking about dharma here in the terms of spiritual practice. If recognizing Sri Krishna's presence in others, by the way, we've had this topic before. I said, recognizing Sri Krishna's presence in others, not believing in Sri Krishna in others. The immediate, direct recognition, perception of Sri Krishna's presence in others is possible only after you've discovered Sri Krishna's presence here. We've had this discussion before. If you haven't discovered Sri Krishna's presence before within you, how in the world are you going to see others as being manifestations of divinity? So that realization that Sri Krishna dwells in all, that everyone and everything is a manifestation of Sri Krishna, that realization, that spiritual wisdom is possible only after you have discovered Sri Krishna's presence within you. And discovered means not believe. Hindus, by and large, believe that Sri Krishna dwells within us all. We're not talking about that belief. We're talking about recognition. We're talking about knowledge. We're talking about enlightenment. To recognize the divinity within you, to recognize the truth of who you are as Satchidananda Atma, I thought that's what we call enlightenment. It is indeed. Now we've got a little glitch here, if I can use that word. And the glitch is, Sri Krishna here is talking about spiritual practice, right? Our context is dharma in a sense of spiritual practice. And he says the best spiritual practice is to recognize my presence in all other beings, which depends on recognizing my presence in you, which depends on being enlightened. So to paraphrase, the best spiritual practice is to be enlightened? Huh? He can't possibly mean that, right? He doesn't mean that. So there is so much, just as in that, we call it Charama Shloka, the final verse of teaching in chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita. I think it is verse 56. Sarva dharman parityajya. Just as in that simple verse, there's so much going on. There's a lot of teaching present in that one verse. The same is true here. So we have to go more deeply into this, and we'll do that now. So he's talking about spiritual practice. Madbhavaha sarva bhuteshu. As a spiritual practice, it means to believe in my presence in all beings. We begin with belief, but belief is not our goal. That, by the way, that's one of the factors that distinguishes Vedanta from religion. Vedanta is over and above Hindu religion because religions are matters of belief. Religions help us establish healthy religious beliefs. But Vedanta is concerned not with the religious belief, but rather with a personal discovery, spiritual wisdom. But how do you get that spiritual wisdom? How do you gain enlightenment? Well, one of the first steps is to have this belief. We begin with belief, we end with knowledge, we begin with religion, we end with spiritual wisdom. And Sri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. This is back in chapter 4. He says, Shraddhavan, one who has shraddha, faith, belief, labhate gains jnanam, spiritual wisdom. One who has faith gains spiritual wisdom. So what does that mean? Faith leads to wisdom. Of course, we can also twist that verse around. Ashraddhavan, one who doesn't have faith, na labhate, will not gain jnanam, spiritual wisdom, enlightenment. So to begin with this faith is crucial. Without this faith, there's no possibility of proceeding on this spiritual path. So for this reason, Sri Krishna says, this is sarva kalpanam, amongst all spiritual practices. This one, sadrichi, is the most important companion to travel that spiritual path with you. The companion is Shraddha, faith. But that which you have, I'm going, did you ever have a big filing cabinet you're going through things? That's what I do while I'm teaching. I'm going through this filing cabinet, looking for the right metaphor. And it usually just takes a few moments to find the right metaphor. And a metaphor is a companion who's with you at the beginning of a trip and not at the end of a trip. Because that's what we're talking about. We said faith is a companion here, but at the beginning of your spirit, we said the ultimate goal is not faith. The ultimate goal is self-realization, if we want to use that word, enlightenment, discovery of Sri Krishna's presence in you, as your true nature. So that means that what starts out at the beginning, faith, evolves into knowledge at the end. So we need a metaphor for a companion that doesn't travel the whole path with you. Can you think of a metaphor? That's why I had to go shuffling through this cabinet. And the cabinet, by the way, is full of all these scriptural teachings. It's just wonderful. I feel so blessed to have spent all these years immersed in this tradition because it is so rich with wisdom and different teachings. Here is the traditional metaphor that's used, and that is you get in a boat to cross a river. When you get to the other side of the river, do you put the boat on your back and keep going? What a perfect metaphor. And I didn't invent it. This is given by so many commentators and so many scriptures. So this is our traditional metaphor. Faith is like that boat. Notice without the boat, you won't get across the river. Without faith, you won't make it to enlightenment. But having reached the far bank of the river, the boat is no longer needed. In the same way, having personally realized the truth that Sri Krishna is here now, this discovery renders faith unnecessary. It doesn't mean bad or anything. It's no longer needed. Is there anything wrong with the boat? Of course not. But you leave it behind. Why? Not because it's a crummy boat. You leave it behind because it served its purpose. So this is our understanding of faith, of Shraddha. Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. One with faith gains knowledge. So look at the stages. So first of all, faith. A general faith will then lead to what we call dridha vishwasa, firm faith. So you start off with kind of floppy faith. Is that even a word? So you start off with floppy faith, and then eventually you have firm faith, and then you come across teachings which says it is a fact, it is not merely something you believe in, and then gives you a lot of reasoning to support how and why it is true. So this is the level of spiritual teachings. So you start with faith, and your faith becomes strong, then you immerse yourself in these spiritual teachings, and through these spiritual teachings, which often use reasoning and metaphors like I've been using, eventually, starting with faith, moving on through spiritual teachings which lead you to personally discover that truth that you seek. In this case, the truth that Sri Krishna abides within you, as you. We call this a personal discovery, self-realization. So enlightenment is not faith. Enlightenment is, I get it. I get it in a very immediate first-person sense. So this is, according to Sri Krishna, this is the best companion, at least the best companion for your trip. By the way, when do you abandon your boat as you're crossing the river? You say, oh, I'm almost to the shore. I don't need the boat anymore. That doesn't work, right? You keep the boat with you until it's outlived its usefulness. Well, this is the sense of Shraddha. You keep it with you until it's outlived its usefulness. Another way of understanding it, another metaphor that's used traditionally, is the bija, a seed. A seed is the origin for a big tree, but that seed, without the seed, the tree wouldn't exist, correct? But please note, the tree exists. What happened to that seed? The seed is no more. So the seed served its purpose in germinating and creating this wonderful tree. That is Shraddha. It's that bija, that seed. Okay, let's continue. Nahyango pakrame dvanso, niyahyango pakrame dvanso. Yeah. Madharmasyodhavan vapi, madharmasyonvana api, maya vyavasita samyaka, maya vyavasita samyang, nirgunatvaranashinaha, nirgunatvaranashinaha. Na, we have to break words apart here. Nahi anga upakrame. Anga, O dear one. He addresses, Sri Krishna addresses his cousin, Uddhava. Anga, O dear cousin. Nahi dvansaha. There is no dvansa, loss, for upakrame, for anything begun, mad dharmasya. In this mad is mat, that pronoun again, my dharmasya. Dharma here again means what? Spiritual practice. We need to follow the context. So for my spiritual practice that I've described, what was that spiritual practice? Prior verse, starting off with that faith that Sri Krishna dwells in us all. Sri Krishna is manifest as us all. That faith which eventually culminates in knowledge, personal discovery. So he says, that is the most important dharma. He says, mad dharmasya, and for that practice, na upakrame, nahi upakrame dvansaha. There is no dvansa, no loss, upakrame, once it's begun. And this is it's a subtle point, but an important point. I gave the bad example. If you get in your boat and you go halfway across and then abandon the boat, things are lost. But that's what he's saying here. So he says nothing is lost. There is no dvansa, there's no loss. Upakrame, once you have begun, there is no loss. Now, it's subtle. In fact, I had to think about it for a moment. What exactly is he meaning here? And the most common interpretation, not the only interpretation, but the most common one, would be to compare his practice to other practices. And the most common practice, spiritual or religious practice, certainly in Sri Krishna's time, the most popular, most common spiritual practice was performing rituals. So he's saying that if you perform my practice and stop after a while, he says nothing is lost. Suppose you're performing a ritual and you stop halfway through. Well, stopping halfway through has many repercussions, one of which is you've hired a priest, right? When does the priest get paid? At the end of the ritual. So you stop halfway through means the priest doesn't get paid. He's going to be one unhappy purohit, one angry priest. But you get the idea that the blessings that one would get from the performance of a ritual, you get those blessings only when it is completely performed, right? Not halfway. Or how about a worldly deed? Suppose you are a contractor and you are building a bridge and the bridge is halfway across the river and you stop. Wait a minute. Or you're taking a degree in college and you stop halfway. You get the idea that in most activities, excuse me, just a moment. Sorry. In most activities, stopping halfway means you've wasted everything. You've wasted your effort. But he's claiming, how can it be? Sri Krishna here claims that my practice is different. If you only do it halfway and then stop, there's still benefit. How can that be? Now you can say, yes, yes, yes. Sorry to make this bad. I shouldn't do that, really. Anyway, bad habit. Anyway, but you get the point. And the point I'm making is that many Hindus would just say, yes, of course. Why is Sri Krishna's method so different than anything else? Because it's Sri Krishna's. This is Shraddha. But as I just said, it's not enough just having Shraddha. We should understand there must be a reason. It's not just because it's Sri Krishna's best technique. There must be a reason. And there is a reason. Sri Krishna's describing being on a path of discovery. If you walk a path halfway and stop, when you start again, you're already halfway there. You don't go back and start from the beginning again, do you? You're already halfway there. Which means if you are engaged in a life of spiritual pursuit and you stop, there are two ways of stopping. One is our lives are often interrupted by huge problems where you have to put everything else down and attend to this practice. Putting everything else down means including your spiritual. If things get really intense and your responsibility is, suppose a family member is in a hospital, you're probably not going to be here on a Saturday morning if a family member is in a hospital in a critical state. So very clearly, there are points in life where our spiritual practice gets temporarily set aside. Sri Krishna here assures you, na dvansaha, nothing is lost, because you can pick it up after the crisis is over, you can pick it up. Sri Krishna also gives a similar message to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. In the end of the 6th chapter, we have that little section at the very end on the Yoga Bhrashta, where he assures Arjuna that if you don't happen to get enlightenment in this life, he says it's okay. You'll pick up the thread in the next life. He gives that assurance at the end of chapter 6. Kind of the same message here. And that is, whatever effort you put into spiritual growth, nothing is wasted. If you fail to gain enlightenment, nothing is wasted. There's another reason. I'm smiling. Remember an anecdote which is nice. Suppose you are engaged in a process of spiritual growth, but just starting off. Like I was just starting off in the 1980s, and I was at my visiting my parents. I told this joke before. Sorry if you've heard it before, but I'm visiting my parents, and I'm reading at their home, reading one of Swami Dayananda's books. I forget something. What is Vedanta? No, Who Am I? Was the title of the book. Who am I? My mother looked at what are you studying? Who am I? And I said, I'm studying Vedanta. It says, what is this Vedanta? My mother didn't really understand, but she said, and this is an exact quote, she said, I have no idea what you're studying. All I know is you're so nice now. Uh-oh. And she said it in exactly those words. She was very simple and straightforward, typical Midwesterner. Just you say what it is. You're so nice now. She didn't emphasize it like that, but I got it. So the point is that even early in your path of spiritual growth, you're already receiving the benefits. You're not in life. Certainly was miles away from anything resembling enlightenment in the 1980s, but even my mother could see that I was deriving some kind of benefit from it. So this is another reason Sri Krishna can assure not only Uddhava, but all of us, na dvansaha, upakrame, once you've begun this path of spiritual growth, nahi dvansaha, there is no loss. There is only benefit, there is only gain, there is only growth. Things don't grow backwards, right? When a child is growing, that growth doesn't reverse. It eventually slows down and stops, but it doesn't reverse. Nothing is lost. And then he makes a further observation. Where am I here? There we go. In the second half, he says, Where am I here? Okay. Madharmasya. Oh, Uddhava anu api. Again, we have to break words apart in the second half, in the second line. Madharmasya Uddhava anu api. Good for you can have that for your Sanskrit classes. I'm addressing Vasanti, so we have good examples of sandhi here, the grammar rules. So, O Uddhava anu api. Anu here means anu, in literally atom, but in context, even a little. Anu api. There's no dvansa, nothing is lost, not even a bit, as we would say in English. Then he says, Maya vyavasitaha samyaka. Samyak becomes samyang due to those same sandhi rules. That which is vyavasitaha, that which is established maya, by me. What is established by me? This dharma, this spiritual practice. What is a spiritual practice? To begin with shraddha, faith, that we are all manifestations of that divinity we call Sri Krishna, and for that faith to then progress to become spiritual realization. So that is Sri Krishna's teaching. That is vyavasataha maya. That which is established by me, Sri Krishna says, that is samyak. That is correct. Why is it correct? It is nirgunatwad. It is free, here guna meaning defects. It is free from any defects. It is free from any shortcomings. It is anashitaha. It is anashishaha. I mean, if I misread, I'll get a wrong meaning here. Anashishaha. It is not driven by desire. Conventional human behavior is driven by desire. You just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. It's like in that boat, if in that boat, instead of going across the river, you're going upstream. And it's a long river. So you're not going to reach the goal if you're going upstream. In the same way, if you're trying to find perfect peace and contentment through what a nice metaphor. If you're trying to reach perfect peace and contentment through worldly achievements, you're going upstream. Means you're making progress, but will you ever reach your goal? You continue to make progress. And further, it's not easy progress. It's hard work going upstream. That really does, I've never used that metaphor before. It really describes worldly life. You're trying to get to the other shore, but you accidentally go upstream. It's very hard going upstream, and you never reach the far shore. This is like trying to find perfect peace and contentment through worldly effort. A lot of effort, you make progress, but never reach the goal. On the other hand, if you go across the river, you reach your goal. So this means the going upstream represents a life driven by worldly desire. So this is anashishaha. This is not based on worldly desire. It's contrary to worldly desire. Instead of seeking worldly happiness, seeking Sri Krishna. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. Back in the Bhagavad Gita, I am that one refuge. I am the only refuge. Okay, then. Where am I here? All right. Yo yo mai pare dharmaha, yo yo mai pare dharmaha, kalpyate nishpalaya chet, kalpyate nishpalaya chet tadayaso nirartasyad tadayaso nirartasyad mayadhirhiva sattama mayadhirhiva sattama sattama, O good one, O Uddhava. Go back up to the top. Yaha dharmaha. What does dharma mean in this context? Spiritual practice. So yaha dharmaha. Whatever spiritual practice, which is mayi, which is directed towards me, pare, which is the ultimate goal. By the way, para or para means the other side of the river, as in para brahma, right? Okay. So whatever spiritual practice is directed towards me, Sri Krishna says, kalpyate. It is fit. It will work as a spiritual practice. So he's broadening up his point. So earlier he gave his special technique. Does it mean all other techniques are bad? No. And he's opening it up here he's going to show that other techniques can also be helpful. Just as in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, sarva dharman, all other practices, parityajya, giving up. He doesn't mean you should be allergic to any other spiritual practice. He's making the same point here. He says, even though my technique, gaining that shraddha in my presence and all, he says that is best. Still, yaha dharmaha, any other spiritual practice is kalpyate, is still worthwhile. It's still beneficial. It means fit. It is capable. But there are two conditions. One condition is mayi. Pare. It should be directed towards me. So using your boat to go upstream is not going in the right direction. Using any other spiritual practice, it's interesting to consider that. Spiritual practices are sometimes used not for a spiritual purpose. Right? What? You're thinking, what? How can spiritual practice be used for something other than a spiritual purpose? Tell me, if you go into a yoga studio in this country, you're practicing an ancient spiritual sadhana, yoga, for what purpose? You can look buff. So that's a good example. By the way, don't think that's a modern problem. In ancient times, plenty of yogis practiced yoga really intensely, but not for a spiritual reason. They wanted siddhis. They wanted special powers. They wanted to walk on water, for example, or fly through the air. And according to the ancient texts, certain yoga techniques are said to enable you to do that. No doubt, practicing yoga in a yoga studio will make your body look better. And according to the ancient yogis, certain techniques could give you some kind of siddhis, so some kind of special powers, but that's using a spiritual practice for a non-spiritual goal. And what Sri Krishna here is saying is that no, if you use any other spiritual practice, as long as it is, I said two criteria, all spiritual practices are helpful if. Criteria one, mayi, pare, if they are directed towards me. By the way, my translation here I think is not very good. The translation I'm giving you right now is I think much better. So as long as that spiritual practice is directed towards me, Sri Krishna says, the second criteria, nishpalaya chet, and chet, if that spiritual practice is nishpala, it's not being done driven by desire. You're not doing it for a particular pala. You're not doing it for a particular result. Because this conventional, we have to explain that a little bit. Conventional worldly behavior is driven by raga and dvesha. I want to get whatever it is that brings me happiness and contentment. I want to get away from whatever gives me suffering and misery. Conventional worldly behavior is driven by raga, dvesha. Suppose we approach our spiritual practice through the lens of raga, dvesha. What will we do? Any spiritual practices which make us happy, we'll do those spiritual practices. And any spiritual practices that don't make us happy, we won't do them. How's that? So for example, you don't have this problem, but many people do. You know, all these Vedanta teachings are so boring. And so they carefully avoid all those spiritual practices. You know, I said, no, I'd rather do some bhajan kirtan, which is wonderful, but shouldn't you also do the other? Since it's part of a package of spiritual practice, if you're driven by raga dvesha, you pick and choose because you're driven by raga dvesha. If you are a serious sadhaka, if you are a serious spiritual practitioner, you do whatever is required, even when what is required is a little bit difficult. So that's what Sri Krishna is saying, that if these two criteria are met, any other spiritual practice is also beneficial. If the spiritual practice is mayi, pare, is directed towards me, and if it is nishpala, if it is done not driven by raga dvesha, so that opens the door for meditation, for all practices of karma yoga, for any other spiritual practice. It's all beneficial. Then he goes on to say something, this is very surprising, what he says at the end here. He says, even if, chet, he says, even if tad ayasaha, that effort, the effort you invest in that spiritual practice, even if that effort nirartaha syat, ends up having no result, nirartaha, useless. Now, what do you mean useless? And Sri Krishna himself gives an example, a useless spiritual practice. That's what he's defining here in so many words, as a useless spiritual practice. What would be an example of a useless spiritual practice? Bhaya dehe eva. Eva, like bhaya adi, like fear, etc. How in the world can fear, etc., be a useless spiritual practice? This is one place where the commentator is very helpful. The commentator gives actually two examples. He says, bhaya, fear. How can fear be a spiritual practice? He gives the example, suppose you're running away from a thief. How do you feel? Bhaya, fear. But suppose, as you're running, you're thinking about Sri Krishna. Running? This is the metaphor, not the metaphor. This is the example given by the commentator. Interesting to get inside his mind a little bit. He says, imagine someone running away from a thief, full of fear, and praying to Sri Krishna. Wonderful! That fear becomes a spiritual practice. because this person has this sense of devotion to Sri Krishna. He gives one more example. He says, he says, he gives the example of shoka, sadness, suffering, sadness. He says, suppose you're, suppose you're crying. Somebody has done something hurtful to you, and you're crying. And suppose, and let me try to put this in a little more tangible. Hard to imagine running away from a thief and praying. So that's, by the way, don't blame me. That's a commentator's example. But he gives another example, which is much more, I think, much more reasonable. He gives Sri Krishna said bhaya, fear. So the commentator has to explain it somehow, and then the commentator explained it the best he could. But then the commentator, by the way, is this Sridhar Swami. This is over 1,000 years ago, I think, or 800 years ago, the date of this commentary. Anyway, he gives another example. He says, suppose you're crying. How can crying be a spiritual practice? That's not so hard to understand. Suppose you can understand that everything is in Bhagavan's hands. Everything is part of Ishvara's order, as my guru would say. Which means whoever hurt your feelings, that's natural, right? People do that all the time. It's natural that that person behaved in such a mean way. It's natural that your feelings are hurt. It's natural that you're crying. Your tears are natural, salty. That's all nature. And all this nature is Ishvara's order. Suppose as you're crying, you have that prayerful appreciation. According to Sri Krishna, your tears become a spiritual practice. That's what he's saying. Even your tears become a spiritual practice if those two criteria, and the most important one is that first one, Mayi, if it's directed towards me. If you're just crying, it's not a spiritual practice unless there's a prayerful dimension to it. And if you're running from a thief, if there were a prayerful dimension to it, that too would be prayer. So this is Sri Krishna's final comments here, which is very much related to karma yoga, the main topic from Bhagavad Gita. Let's take one more verse today. Esha buddhimatam buddhir, Esha buddhimatam buddhir, manisha cha manishinam, manisha cha manishinam, yat satyamrite neha, yat satyamrite neha, martyenapnoti mamritat, martyenapnoti mamritat. So he's starting to wrap up this particular spiritual teaching where he says the best practice is to have shraddha in my presence in all beings and to seek personal realization of that truth. And he says, Esha buddhihi, this wisdom, buddhimatam, Esha buddhihi, this is the wisdom, buddhimatam, of the wise. This is the wisdom of the wise, manisha cha, and this is the manisha, the intelligence, manishinam, of the intelligent. This is the wisdom of the wise, this is the intelligence of the intelligent, and the commentator also wants to make this a little bit more concrete. So this is the wisdom of the wise, which means the wisdom that allows you to correctly practice what Sri Krishna has taught, not just in this chapter, in the whole of the Uddhava Gita. The wisdom is your true wisdom is the knowledge with which you can correctly practice, follow his teachings. Bad, it's not a joke, it's a sarcastic observation. How many homes have a Bhagavad Gita on the bookshelf? Right? How many homes have the Bhagavad Gita on a bookshelf? Can we just guess? Let us guess 1 billion. No, actually, that's too many. Let's say several hundred millions of households. So, of those several hundred millions of households, how many people have actually studied that Bhagavad Gita and put those practices into their day-to-day lives? So this is a problem. So true wisdom is to follow. True wisdom is, let's put it like this. True wisdom is to open that Bhagavad Gita and learn its lessons. And then what is Manisha? Here the commentator calls it Chaturyam, skill. And what would it be? To skillfully employ those teachings. So the wisdom of the wise means open up the Bhagavad Gita, and the intelligence of the intelligent means follow those teachings, implement them in your life. So just nice poetry to end this topic. And then he concludes with, this is really enigmatic. Enigmatic means it's hard. What? It's like you read it. What does he mean? So let's see this last half here. He says, "Yat satyam anratena." Oh, we have to connect all of this stuff. So this is how the commentator explains it. Yat anratena. No, we have to put it in different order. Yat in the middle of the second line, yat apnoti, that by which apnoti, one gains mam, me. That by which one gains me, which is amritam, me, and one who gains me, and immortality, and apnoti, the one gains satyam, back up a line, third line. That by which one gains satyam, truth, amritam, immortality, and ma means mam, me. That by which one gains truth and immortality, which describes enlightenment, which describes finding Sri Krishna's presence, not just in yourself, but simultaneously in all beings. How is that obtained? It is obtained how? Anratena, by untruth, literally, and this is going to sound really weird at first, so give me just a minute to make you understand. So that which is satyam is obtained anratena, through untruth. Literally what he says. Satyam apnoti, truth is gained anratena, through untruth. And then a second line, amritam, last line, sorry. Amritam, immortality, is apnoti, is obtained how? Martyena, through mortality. What in the world is he saying? So he says, through untruth, truth is obtained, and through mortality, immortality is obtained, and this is how you reach me. How's that for enigmatic? So the commentator explains it nicely. He says that this whole, actually a very profound observation. Where is truth? Is truth found in the Bhagavata Purana, in the section of the 10th book, if I remember correctly, And in the 24? The 24th chapter of the 10th book of the Bhagavata Purana, which is one of the 18 Mahapuranas, there you find truth. Is that really where you find truth? Do you get the point Sri Krishna is making here? You find truth here. Sri Krishna is the truth. And Sri Krishna is not found in a book. Not that the book is, in fact, he admits the book is helpful, but it's not truth. So he says, andratena, through that which is not truth, a book, satyam apnoti, one gains, me, the truth. And similarly, martyena, through that which is mortal, through that which is a worldly creation, like a book, like the Bhagavata Purana, through that book, amritam apnoti, one gains immortality, that immortality being mam. So this, now you get, it look very strange on the surface. If you just read, through untruth you gain truth, and through mortality you gain immortality. So the commentator deconvolutes it very nicely. I don't do this much, but allow me, because there's another way of interpreting this. By the way, the commentators are 1,000 times smarter than me or any other teacher, but sometimes there's other ways of looking at a verse and you can get some other insights. So look at this discussion. From Amrita, in the second line, Anrita leading to Satyam, and Mrityu in the second line leading to Amritam. Wait a minute, does that sound a little bit like something we chant a lot? Asato ma sadgamaya. Sadgamaya, lead me to truth. Asataha, from untruth. From untruth, lead me to truth. Tamasoma doesn't fit with this verse, but the last one, mrityurma, from death. Amritam gamaya, lead me to immortality. To me, what the commentator said is absolutely correct. This book, the Bhagavata Purana, is not truth. This book is not Sri Krishna. And you won't, just to make the point really clear, you won't find Sri Krishna in the book. Where will you find Sri Krishna? Here. So what the commentator explains is absolutely correct. But this seems to be a poetic echo of that lovely verse that we chant, and the verse we'll chant in just a few minutes at the altar. This is a good place to conclude today. Tomorrow, Sunday, we'll have our Vedanta class, Upadesha Sahasri, at 10 o'clock, and Satsanga, question answer, at 11. Please come and join us, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavhinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utavasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyoma Vadvyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.